He was arrested for a crime he didn't commit, simply because he was black. The officer was consumed by racism, willing to destroy his life. But everything changed when he realized who sat across from him in court. What happened next will shock you. But let's start from the beginning. It's a sweltering summer afternoon, and the city pulses with the heat of the day as Jerome Thompson steps out of his black sedan, parked at the corner of 5th Street. A well-dressed black man in his late 30s, Jerome adjusts his black suit, the crisp fabric still neat despite the humidity. His fingers run through his freshly styled hair, smoothing the strands back as he begins his walk to the local cafe. The setting sun bathes the street in a soft, golden light, casting long shadows across the pavement. The atmosphere feels serene, almost peaceful. As Jerome makes his way down the sidewalk, the sudden whine of a police siren slices through the air, barely audible over the hum of city life. A squad car rolls up next to him, and before he can react, Officer Stephen Hayes steps out. Hayes is a middle-aged white man, his crew cut neat but stiff, his uniform slightly too tight around his neck, giving off an uncomfortable vibe. His gaze hardens the moment it lands on Jerome. There's no mistaking it. The suspicion is immediate. "Hey!" Hayes barks, his voice sharp. "Where do you think you're going?" Jerome halts, taken aback by the officer's aggressive tone. He tries to stay calm, offering a simple explanation. "I'm just walking to the cafe," he says, his voice steady, though confusion creeps in. "You sure about that?" Hayes presses, his tone rising. "You look like you've been up to something." Before Jerome can respond, Hayes steps forward, grabbing his arm and yanking him toward the cruiser. "What's going on here?" Jerome demands, his heart pounding in his chest as he tries to maintain his composure. The officer remains silent, but the grip on Jerome's arm tightens. In one swift, brutal motion, Hayes slaps handcuffs around his wrists. "You're under arrest for suspicious activity," he announces, ignoring Jerome's protests. As Jerome is shoved into the back seat of the squad car, a crowd starts to gather, whispering in disbelief. No one steps in to help, leaving Jerome feeling small, humiliated, and completely powerless. The courtroom is heavy with tension. The only sounds breaking the silence are the shuffle of papers and the hushed murmurs of the audience. Jerome stands at the defense table, his back stiff, his clothes meticulously pressed, though they feel more like a uniform than comfort. The toll of the trial is visible on him, his face drawn, his posture weary, but there's a quiet resolve in his eyes. His lawyer stands beside him, offering occasional words of reassurance, but the weight of the moment is crushing. The gallery is full. Family members and friends sit in anticipation, while curious onlookers fill the benches, all eager to witness the unfolding drama. At the front of the room, across from Jerome, sits the state's attorney, Victoria Lawrence. She is a woman of impeccable composure, her stature commanding the attention of the room. In her early 40s, she exudes the confidence of someone who has fought against decades of systemic barriers. Every movement she makes carries the weight of her journey, and her unwavering gaze speaks of a lifetime of perseverance. Across from her sits Officer Hayes, his body tense, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He knows the walls are closing in. He shifts uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes darting between the defense and the prosecutor. His earlier confidence has evaporated, replaced by a palpable fear of the consequences to come. Jerome watches him with a mixture of anger and disbelief, the realization of the officer's prejudice heavy in his chest. The judge enters, and the room rises in unison. Jerome takes a deep, measured breath, steadying himself. The trial begins. Hayes is the first to take the stand. His testimony is full of contradictions. He claims that Jerome was acting suspiciously, that he looked out of place. Victoria Lawrence listens intently, her expression impassive. She waits for the right moment, then asks, her voice calm but cutting, Officer Hayes, would you say that your decision to arrest Mr. Thompson had anything to do with the fact that he is a black man walking through a predominantly white neighborhood? The room goes still. Hayes falters, stammering. I didn't mean it like that, he mutters, trying to regain his composure. Victoria doesn't miss a beat. It's okay, Officer Hayes. We all know what happened here. You saw a black man, and you assumed the worst. Her words hang in the air, sharp as a knife. Hayes looks away, unable to meet her gaze, his confidence shattered. The trial takes a dramatic turn as Victoria Lawrence presents new evidence, throwing the courtroom into an uproar. She reveals a series of cases documenting Officer Hayes' history of racial profiling, showing that he's made a pattern of arresting and harassing black individuals without cause. The room buzzes with disbelief and simmering anger. The judge bangs his gavel, but the murmur of outrage doesn't fade. Jerome's pulse quickens. He can feel the tide turning. But then, Victoria takes it further. Officer Hayes, she begins, her voice cutting through the tension. Do you recall the time you stopped my brother, Michael Lawrence, a few years ago? He was just walking to the store when you stopped him on the same street and accused him of being out of place. The courtroom goes deathly silent. The sound of breathing fills the room as all eyes snap to Hayes. His face drains of color, his lips dry, his body stiffening. He swallows, his eyes darting uncomfortably around the room. He clearly recognizes the name, and his growing panic is impossible to ignore. Victoria doesn't give him a chance to recover. She leans forward slightly, her voice calm but laced with authority. I'm not just the state's attorney. I'm also his sister. The words hit like a ton of bricks. The realization sinks in as Hayes' face crumbles. He freezes, his body drenched in sweat. His eyes drop to the floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze. He stammers, trying to form words, but nothing comes out. The courtroom erupts into whispers, the shock of this revelation spreading like wildfire. The murmurs grow louder, filled with disbelief and outrage. Jerome, watching Hayes crumble under the weight of his own actions, feels a swell of triumph deep in his chest. For the first time since his arrest, he sees it. The flicker of justice, of fairness, rising above the systemic bias that has haunted him for so long. After a tense deliberation, the jury returns with their verdict. Guilty. The room fills with a collective sigh of relief. But it's not just for Jerome. It's a win for everyone who's ever felt the sting of systemic racism and injustice. Hayes' actions are officially labeled as racially motivated, and the officer's career ends in disgrace. As the judge delivers his sentence, Victoria's voice cracks slightly as she addresses the court. Today is not just a victory for Mr. Thompson, but for everyone who's ever been targeted because of their skin color. This system is broken, but it's people like Jerome who can help fix it. Jerome smiles, standing tall for the first time in weeks. The weight of the injustice that once burdened him feels just a little lighter. He knows the battle isn't over, but this moment, this victory, is a powerful reminder that change is possible, even if it takes time. As the court adjourns, Jerome's family and friends rush to congratulate him. Victoria walks up to him, giving him a reassuring nod. We've got a long way to go, she says quietly. But today, we made history. Jerome nods back, a sense of peace settling over him. He knows this is only the beginning, but for the first time, he feels like he has a chance.